Ay, amici. 사령은 그래서는 대안스러. 대안들 심전 탕지 장에서 토마미다네서 다기 파마 주디에서 대안자니 리드가 심전 탕지 소소는 알아서 파마로 쳐그래서 아니 펜타드스네 봐. 답이서 답이 힌트지 가라 펜파드메 봐서라 답이 힌트지 제스를 제상 심전단에서 경 하만 정 파마 인장 아니 다다들 펜도 거기 아니 베드 힌트지 침보레스라 괜찮고인데 세텐진 대남라서 코아도 해 하초지 있어 제발도 뉴스로 주문하라 네 거기 도행이 하초가 아니 내전다 되게 네 버터 좀 준두가라스라 좀 제베스라 대다 둥해 대다 당서 테나스 치마루 냠베스 hinje chada su goms cheza de susu ge hamege pamala soba de de na so dunge chung thongde gala tako dunge de thero chena chimaro khanta la ja model ra de gongure sa gonla sa teta jang su dunge thanchi dala timshi cheza khonju ga ji dunge de susu sam ta tu ina khonju ge dunge de ngala timba sho do de sam ta gore es la ra thoshi es dagi su 다기 류롱죄지 수두숨 다기를 소소게 지라 류다 아니 롱죄다 아니 지 두숨 사비 개와 참마 라 개와 남세 대나라서 땅위에서 대나서 대신 제바 아니 개와 표와 삼시 제자 소소를 류다 롱죄다 가려여 바이나 두숨 사비데 다다 마오바 수이 개자 칸 이게 바리 아니 콘솔라 바포자 코돌 주나 상와다 아니 딘데기 아니 개와야 표와 수나 표와 당서 대달 지나 가비 있어 덤바타보 타드 채워 근데 이나 아니 지기 소소라 가비로 파기라 펜타 투거든데 아니 가와기 아니 로 덤발라나 한데 딘데기 아니 슈타고 지기레스라 다지 제비 있어 로테스 젤하와 제비 시르스 제가 근데 상야디 아주 다진 제와 다진 양지를 상주고 생주로 어딘데 근데 상 담아이나 다진 양지를 로디 엔체 하와 차이레 제비 시르 데니라스 다티스티바찬스라
So then continuing with the text itself, and then we're still talking about developing this relative bodhicitta. And then we discussed how we should be able, how we should go about developing this attitude of altruistic intention for all sentient beings by engaging in the practice of giving and taking. And then herein we are discussing about the practice of giving and we are talking about the practice of taking and giving. And herein we already established that since all these sentient beings have served as our mothers in a previous lifetime, and then since they raised us with this unconditional love and kindness at one point in our existence, then you should be able to generate in yourself a strong sense of gratitude, as well as a strong sense that you want to help these sentient beings, because as they exist and as they take rebirths in samsara, they inevitably go through the many trials and suffering that is the mark of samsaric existence. And then with that kind of attitude that you have established in your mind, then also focus focus your motivation towards these sentient beings in this manner, that if these sentient beings, if they are able to be free and liberated from these trials and sufferings of samsara, then it will serve a great purpose. And with this kind of thought, then establish a strong sense of compassion towards these sentient beings who are like your mother. And then as you pray for them to be liberated from samsara, then meditate on the aspect of taking all of their suffering upon yourself, and meditate in this manner, that all their sufferings are seeped into you now in your meditation. And then at the end of the meditation, and then dedicate all the physical body and material positions of the 3 times of your existence, and all the virtue and all the joy you dedicate it to all the sentient beings. Lasu. So with this kind of engagement in the practice of giving and taking, then it forms a solid foundation for you to generate this bodhicitta or bodhisattva ideal. Lasu.
Nula chubar cha la de tawadi karten usna ta nga tonglen la de shi ora ni nula chubar cha se sheba che sun de is long paran do nga zo u pa tang wa ra long paran do na te dang nga sa ndo ni se da gi ja wa ge de la ta de wa da ge wa la ra thang ji chen la pan do ndo song sam bi am sam de ta ma des ta nga u tonglen de ma shi ba che go ra se ne ge pa tang de sam ta tu ne Shadshula Suzu Gyapa Dame Basaira. Today, Surunwa Nas, Jinji Dunya Tanji Dala, Jora Goms. Tisan Uya Tendi Samaya Tangi San Rochera. Suzu Umatanding Ala Deva, the Gava Kai, but the Sinjataji Matangi and Tendegi and the Gomgurela.
So when the text it says train in the 2, giving and taking alternately, then in the next line it says these 2, practice of giving and taking, should be mounted on the breath. Now herein, when we say this 2 should be, and the text in the first line of the second verse, it says alternately. So when we take a breath and when we draw out a breath, breathe in, breathe out. As we breathe in and breathe out, then when you breathe in, meditate in this manner that you are taking upon all the sufferings of samsara and all the sentient beings onto yourself. And as you breathe out, that you are dedicating and giving all your happiness and all your virtue or merits that you have accumulated for the sake of all sentient beings of samsara.
Anda dikol ta koran intana kunduji karna le mara tingi la ngaso karados na ani tombani ko la resra ani toni ko la ta toni la digala karsan chi pa ngaso thani de yo ba ta ta man ga jira ni de chebo chene pa ta den se de na mani ba inde jira sha ho resra ani ti thani de ngaso chi ra wa khanjo na so ba mi ngada ko la chama yi thani de yo ba ha de ji la yo ba de ji number 2 pa ta den se ni ne mani ba de ani Emma Mevadala Casana Tambanisha Ra. Udi, and it is Jela to Tonland or Tonaka specimen Tandledora. Tinti to Anikarsu, Gedi Karsa, Gevada, Ani Deva Karina, Passion of Tangoda, Shingi and Titi to Sanegi, and the Sano Tango, Tinti Tonland Gombal and the Chavra.
So for those of you who are not able to join in the morning session and who are not able to join us in the morning session, to kind of give you a summary of the topics that we discussed so far, in short, we talked about this wisdom of emptiness, and then herein, when we talk about emptiness, we say that all phenomena, that is self and person, and all outer objects, they are all empty of being truly existent. They do not exist inherently, and they do not exist without causes and conditions. But when we say that they do not exist inherently, we do not mean that they do not exist at all, but they do exist as names, as concepts. In this manner they do exist, but ultimately they do not have any inheritance in their own right without depending on causes and conditions. And then right now, the topic that we are covering right now is the practice of giving and taking. And I think both of you have attended the previous classes, and I think this topic you have some understanding of what we mean by giving and taking.
Di tonle gom di gala ani nyam ja da ani jito le ni do ta ta nyam ja di ngam so tne gong go ba ra su su chi sang tan lo la tne di ga nyam ja che ta ni ba jito de ra jito ni ani ka le su na yul sun tu sun yul sun de kha sha wala ni de do ngam so la chi da ni pa ma sun ji ra da la ni chi ni la ni chi an pa ma de sun che ani yul sun tu sun la de ngam de je na tin sun ra pena 수준이에 전에 작업체 우리 달에 전에 세단 전에 아니 지기 갔다 담아달라고 따여와서 팀으로 들으실 샤오라 유수 두숨 아니 게자송라 되가나 레차메바 샤다메바 팀무미비스 아니 게자송 샤오라 타와나 레다 시송데에서 아니 이 간데서는 유유도 뭐라 바르마송라다 유유도 예도 아주 통하는 아주 차고지 그래 뭐 아주는 당화지 그래 바마르지서는 바마지 통서는 아주 단형으로 차리고라 뭐든지 아니 차당 모순 제가 차과다 당화다 모순 제반나 다따르서 유라다 소소기 다다블로 있으라 유순나 스테니 다 소소라샤나 유지 차고라 가르치 제다니 바마 가르치서 유지 내가 테니 있어 두순 집에 있어 특별한 아주 되셔는 코로를 소소기 빼셔와 있는 미질라는 야보통에 두자도는 바마도 간다치 통고라 될 집이 아니 두순 집이 선제 망보 예배에서 제상 되게 아니 되셔는 팀무수다 되게 강사 망보 예배인자 될 두순 제행이 아니 선제 망보 예배에서 대마지 수 두순 탐지 달라 순디니 제상 코난솔라 미신바게 선제 신바게 줄라 아니 두순도 안 참아 나랑 있으니까 선바로시라 달라 두니에스라 대망사 차당기 팀무 메비스 게자순 콘솔라 가서나 진인도 샤메바 샤다메바 팀무 메비 게자순라 디파 참아 콘솔 소소 틀레마다 겨순 겨와 참아 콘솔라 파 땅으로 치는라 게자순다 덴바 추르지 향도 고모스 제장 되셔는 팀무스도 소소를 쓰든 수고마다 아니 디카자나 디주 미겨와 차고라 아니 콘솔라 아니 지 디인도샤메바 팀무 바샤다메바 데게 게자순도 콘솔라 바 콘솔라 줄을 지어서 란테네 고모레스라
그래서 유숨디 엔저건 지송한다
유숨도 아주 데차체세 이로아 답변을 달란도 드라체 니체 아니 파르마 라
So then, moving on with the text, the third line of the second verse in the main practice, it reads 3 objects, 3 poisons, and 3 sources of virtue. Then the 3 objects are the objects of our negative affliction, and it could be simply understood as our danye and parmara. And the kind of like conception we have of enemies or like someone near to us, these are 2, and then someone some neutral object of affliction, wherein when we talk about the 3 poisons, towards someone we hold dear and someone who is near to us, we have the negative. The poison of attachment is aroused in us, and then towards someone we do not like or an enemy, then the then the poison of anger or the poison of aversion arises in us. Then for a neutral object, then it is clouded by ignorance. So these are the 3 objects of our afflictions, and the way these 3 poisons arises in us. And then the 3 sources of virtue are the gezasumdi kangasumre. So then the 3 sources of virtue would be free from attachment, free from aversion, and free from ignorance. Plus.
제상 된데 공부이나 텔라 템바고 제상 된데 아니 탱하게 소소 구마땅라 템바고이 시르스 아니
디슈아 유숨 아니 심진 타우다르 유숨라 때네 두숨집에 심진 망보유베 대남지 두 두숨 탐지 타글라 뒤네라 디드시준
제상 다스나 다타르라데 소소나시 나라 데시시나 티무스 요라 소달라 텔레 예바나시 콘솔라 요레스 근데 인사 아니 콘솔 가지기 데시시나 티무스 마루가 이타 디바사에 요라 도서 상마에 소절로 쓴디와 콘솔이 마루마데 얘기 쓰네바 나라 겨요 바칸도 예바도 코라파탄
So then as we establish the 3 objects and the 3 poisons, and then when we apply it to ourselves, then we see how like these 3 poisons affect our interactions with these 3 objects, and this is similar. This interaction it similarly applies to all other sentient beings. So all other sentient beings have these 3 poisons in them, and then they relate to their 3 objects in the same manner. So if you are able to establish that, then meditate in this manner, that I will take upon the source of suffering, which is this three poisoning, upon myself from these other sentient beings. Yes.
이네 콘돌라 트와드가 이네 트와드 피징이 하고 있던다. 단다디가 아니 지금 메이 셴바드 간델라야르 서서도 카르테고라에 피징 사레 이네 디월라 세히질리드라. 담보디 마히주 디마 히사디 안 담도 트와이나 안 트와트인데 레슬라.
Yes. I'm sure there are questions regarding how do you actually practice this giving and taking of like the three poisons upon oneself. And but I encourage you to give the text a chance as we go through the text, and I think it will become more clearer as we cover the text. But I will welcome the question later on too.
Just can you clarify again what are the three objects, three poisons, and the source of virtue? Just repeat that, please.
The yusum, tuksum, jezasum, the anjogoni chisumro nondas.
유숨라네 베나디라. 유숨라나 다나 저기 드랄라는 산디오 아니면 다지 아니 다 니엘라는 소소지 프렌드 오토도 소션이라 바말라리 칼로 이코노미 칼로
Neutral dose.
어디 딘스 선파이 뭐저 제세 시지선라 아니 두순도 가서는 뇌샤시다 디무순지라 아니 게자선은 뇌샤메가 샤다메가 디는
So simply these three objects and three poisons and three virtues of three sources of virtue could be simply understood in this manner. The three objects would be our friends, our family, something that we hold dear. Then this is the first object. The second object will be our enemies, someone we do not like. This is the second object. And the third object is neither friends nor enemy, a sort of a neutral object. And then the three poisons are attachment, aversion or anger, and ignorance. And then the three sources of virtue are freedom, free of attachment, or freedom free of attachment, or free of attachment, free of aversion or anger, and free of ignorance.
타콘스 디키오 칸데 하마고 있나라 베나 다체 니에체 아니 카르사 파르마 소션도 베나 데차 시나 티무스샤라 타펜 오르 또 그다음에 샤리르 니 드라 파르마샤라 다 니엘 할랑 아주 착바죠라 아니 달라 당와죠 아니 파마달랑 아주 예와토 된다라
So the way we should understand the relationship between these three objects and the three poisons is in this manner. When we talk about someone who is near to us, our friends and family, then we naturally, out of the three poisons, naturally the poison of our attachment arises in us. Wherein when we talk about someone we do not like or our enemy, then naturally the poison of aversion or anger arises in us. And then when we talk about someone who is neither our friend nor our enemy, someone who is neutral to us, then naturally our conception of such a person is clouded by ignorance. Am I translating a little bit too fast? Okay. Are you getting to note them down?
Okay. Okay, da di thadi jela dilra tenda ani themba ko chesang ga tanda ye kala da suzu chi phagela anen de session timura chimgewe ge ani tende de susu la rajela sudi ko da susu ge al patang da sa tela ani themba ku shiris tela tende ge thenya ge sam tang ge chidra ani Chulam ko de tsiki jangala ta ga chulam da ga tan tsawe gi tsiki la masana ta wa na su kar chigo me de tsin de yong do ra ta tsin chulam da ga na zo cha ni do ni wa de wa kar chin kon de la chama la de tsiki jangala de tsiki ma sin de ra ta la sam ta wa na she su ba de za wa na de su yo ba di kan de la wa na simjen nam ji se dipa tang asra du nge thang ji da la simhen shi 진짜 상도 간데스 땅월라나 심전 타지기 아니 디바레 아니 두게 든 참아 나라 해 쇼스라 콘주게 두게 나라 해 쇼스 아니 다기 이제 개와다 대와 타지 심전라 해 버슈지 지 근데 상도 레스라 지 저지 선덤바 진짜 아니 수수 칸마 셰바레 덤바 타고 근데 로슈 타고 지제 오르 주마 많이 방모에 내주는데 나를 주는 데서래 콜라 마준 데라 이내 가지고 있는데 진 깔에 가버려 이내 파마도 상무도 파마도 저기 수수 보고 나아 보고 많은 나는 따뜻한 섬이 콘솔로 로시 데투도 이내 가지고 데스 깔에 가버려 진짜 가만히는 서서 보고 나디갈 부위 나나도 자기도 라마 시리갈 다코 나와라데 나나나 디샤데 데 sometimes vegetarian time.
So herein, as we establish this relation and the way these three objects and three poisons interact and arises in us, and then we establish a freedom from these three poisons, which serves as the virtue, which serves as the source of virtue for us. Then in all activities, as we talk about taking on the three poisons upon ourselves, and then in all activities, not just in your meditation, in all your activities, then train yourself by applying the root texts and the slogans, the instructions. Herein it's translated as slogans, but it would mean like the instruction or the instructions that are mentioned in the text. And now the way like a traditional monastic would go about learning a text is of course like memorizing this text. So you are encouraged to kind of memorize these instructions and then to apply it in your daily activities, because these instructions, they are short, concise, and very impactful. And then, so herein, when we say that you should be able to take upon the suffering and the poisons of others upon yourself, then it might seem something that we cannot easily practice. It might seem that it is tough for us to aspire to such an ideal practice. But then I think if we think about a mother and the relationship between an infant who has yet learned how to speak and that infant's mother, then we kind of see this practice evident in that relation. Because herein when we say like so herein when we say that all the non-virtuous actions and the suffering that other sentient beings that they suffer, may it ripen in me, may it manifest in me, and that all the happiness and all the joy and all the virtue that I have accumulated, may it ripen and manifest in the other sentient beings. It kind of seems a little bit out of reach for us in this practice. But when we think about the relation that an infant who hasn't learned how to speak yet has with his mother, then the mother in that instance, when that infant is going through some suffering, or like when he's being uncomfortable, or when he falls sick, then in that instant, I think a mother has this natural instinct and this natural wish that this little child of mine, like she has this wishful thinking that at least if I am able to take his suffering myself, then he will be at least free from that illness. So in that unconditional love and compassion that a mother has for that infant, I think this practice is evident.
얘기 참으시고 그걸 부춘지도 로직다 나와투스 계속 라신들아 로싱도 게무시에도 로직 가위나지도 진짜시기도 근데 그 구글을 칼을 내도 칼은 보도록 시튼시나요 먼저 하고 말다 그거를 합치지 하와파네 쇼지만 아니 그 라신 말다 누구도라 이제 다 동바서 마마오차 아니 파다제기도 다 먼저 보셨으면 가를 만들는 좀 셰하고 말이 아니 바이 명아춘지를 되게 차와지 바디가 차와부터까지 잘 하려 게차셔서 되는 저거 바이 명아치도가 아니 고도기 갑자 내치네 근데서 다 보드 시설도 담보데 신나로 줘라 다 아주 딜레 아주 미망고다 나한테 빙자다 선 아주 진나시나 따다를 해줘 그러나 라싱게레 그렇지 제 보고디 bed나디 아르마데 마데 코데데 아니 그거 미치다 안치다 파자제 담르지 제가 대단 아주 나라 상주세 제든 레마다이네 아주 제 치마로 상다 내가 나시기 소소기 파마래 제가 치대는 어떤 상으로 예빨라 아말라 나발때 나나나 디서트 라 남부 파마데야 부글라 제가 친구도 내요나 예쁘고 나발래 나나 따따르서 또 예쁘고 시월에 나시는 따데 근데 이거 춘주춘주 나도 레이도 제가 네게 가르때 오라는 아주 미신발이야
So then, so as not for you to get bored with when we go through the commentary itself and stick to the text, I'll give you an example that I experienced that I had. Samusora. One of my niece, she has a son. and that little then that son, that child hasn't learned to speak yet, and then one day that child, he was like he was burning with fever, and then as a kid, since he's not as a small child who hasn't still learned to speak, that kind of they bear through that physical discomfort or illness unless and until they are unable to bear it, and then they kind of flail about and then make noise, right, that they are suffering through something. And then we immediately took him to a small clinic, and when we took him to the clinic, we realized that the fever has crossed 100 degrees Celsius already. That means he's in danger, and that he had a small kanal mazur lara. So he had what do you call that? Not a fit, but when you have wounds in your tongue, in your mouth, these small kids, they go through that. Ulcer, yeah. So he had an ulcer in his mouth, and at that moment, since we were a bunch of adults, us together, and we saw that little kid who is unable to speak and communicate this discomfort and discomfort and illness to us, then when he was injected and as he went through this suffering, then at that moment, us as a bunch of adults, in us, I think we had this feeling okay, at least if one of us adults suffered through that, we would have been able to communicate it beforehand, right? So in that instance, small instances like that show us that as human beings, we can aspire, and we will, that we are actually capable or aspiring to practice in this manner as mentioned in the text.
chavi shiris chirang azu khatu samwa ne jengi dungi de khandas ne ngor ra tinde ngazu samgur loylen chi mashmo ro chaira ni dungi de ko khandas jawni ko dungi ni khandas ne ngor na azu tinde sanu ko ina ta ko ra ani ne ba chavi shir tinde gi ani tinde ne ni gur be na ni gur is ni ba chaye ge chi junse karala na lembi korun tang sa korun karsa le korin rani tsewa rani tsamdaladi nembi korin rani tsamdaladi gala tendegi tsenegi korin pyura pangarin rotandi sosugi ranshu ne tsamta sosugi tsane ya sanu tangne ya laisira tsane shie sunde yesa tila kandes lawarsana tende ona migi shingi dungi de sosu tsene sosu dewa de shenla pa te nyugiri bela na nyugiri yes te kandes na sosu rangi tsane pa sanu tangwa inas lawra pena dala sa maopa na sa njui dungi nam sa tata lampe sa je shenchi chizang ta di kanda sa na maopa la ngal dungi mawe tanda nga su suyo duwa sa ra ine maopa nga di tanda dada marwa ra ine nga na jenchi be kansa kani jenti chicha wara de maopa la su la dungi mayo ma dang a dewa waya tanda nga su tu duwa sa ra ini ki jetu da maopa la nga la dungi jimba nyeba ina tinge tanda gi juya kosa ni meba sutu do asra tinde gi sutu ni ani maung paran ju yi du nam tata lang be tata lang bela de khatu sene de yo ma de khanda jila so tinde gi chila ne ya bu ta wai na maung pa du nge de ka tho ra ani je jen ji du nge yang ne minu pa ka le ni ban jiro che tan ta yin so so la sam de so so jen ji res ine je ta te ba jo le tinde so tu ni ba yo res la ra ban jiro was.
So then when we talk about these practices, then of course there is a natural hesitation in our mind that would we be really able to practice this in our daily activities. Then the text advises us in the last line, begin the process of taking with yourself. Now what does it mean when it says begin this process of taking with yourself? Herein we are advised to think about this practice of giving and taking by practicing it, by applying it to yourself first. Herein, when we talk about this practice, it advises us that when we talk about us in the present time and us in the future, even though these two selves are not the same, but the continuum of the self remains the same. Because the continuum remains the same, then in future, to avoid suffering in the future, then you can accumulate the conditions and causes to not suffer in the future in the present time. Likewise, even in a separate continuum of person, there is someone else, then you can likewise aspire to the same and have the same ability to help others not accumulate the source of suffering in the future.
다 숨바 쟁년 람디라 거기 갈 마차와를 보내치는 샤야주아 다 숨바 들레이다 숨바 쟁년 상주지 람디 치러와슬라 디체수도 가서 채와네스 퇴주지 디베 다 뇌다 쥐다 안 진대기 디베 강위 체스라 디 간다 디베레다 메게위 강위 찰라 아니 쟁년 상주지 람디 파지로 쟁년 바 강이도 중앙이네 강이디가 직 대화를 가능한 그런 적이 대바지 시기더라. 된 바지도 알아야 돼. 다들 간에 것이 예수한테에서 디빈데브를 가르치는 회지 있은 저바 양바. 진짜 디발라야 되게 안 되게 데브 정말 냠더라. 회다 찌게 아니 데브도 개와도 양바 당스. 아니 신전라 마rumba 라 소베스. 제가 신전 아니 데데치게 마rumbal라나다 만디바도 치차오라. 마rumbal라 소베 아니 동네 마보 좋아. 제가 딘데게 지금 되자시는데 젠송게 아니 지금 동네 마보 지제 그래서 좋아 나스 딱 소소를 진정당한테 제가 나시기 동네라 수바 동네 마보 지무도 좋아 나스 디도 가르쳐 오스네 대니 상주지에서 나도 좋아라스 디 상주게 나도 다 강에지 태워도 상주라도 간데서 주고를 나스라 아니 삼바도 좋아니 이래서 파지단들라 라 삼바도 좋아니 때 아니 삼바라 고도 당스 대단 상주지선 지스 쟁년 상주지랑도 주로스 제가 들에 아니 삼바도 좋아니 제 아니 대단 상주지 있으라 쟁년 아니 상주랑도 좋아라는 뜻이 돼서 뒤에 현재 말이더라
So then this concludes the second practice, which is the main practice. And then moving on with the text, we come to the third practice of the 7 points of mind training, which is transforming adversity into the path of enlightenment. And now this part of the text, I think it kind of addresses your expectations regarding the title of the course. Wherein it says transforming suffering into happiness. So herein, when we talk about transforming adversity into the path of enlightenment, then the enjoying jikson to the nuju digbe gangwe se kengi chanju lamdu jur she song desra dibe debunu ji jorwa nya batan simje marung bala sokpe dungye mambu chuana dingi gi chanju gi lamdu jurwala samjurni le samba odichi yanjong sum
samba da joani ra samba da joani che ani samba de la yang ani de che do samba la yang ko zo tang tandam samba la yin che ra tandam ba ni che ko zo tang tandam be samba ko zo tang chi che ani tandam be shang sen chi si jen yin lang da jen yin ba de pa jo la wala de hitali gi do ba shang ju ji lang de ju ro
So then when we talk about transforming adversity into the path of enlightenment, then first we need to kind of accept that the result of non-virtuous actions has this effect of depleting the physical self and the environment in which we exist. And then also the result of the result of non-virtuous actions has this quality of inflicting harm upon sentient beings. So the result of non-virtuous actions is manifested in the suffering of samsara, and then if the result of these non-virtuous actions manifests in the many sufferings of samsara, then to able to transform these adversity of this non-virtuous action into the path of enlightenment, then the practice has two aspects. The first one is the intention, the second one is application, and then the first one, which is developing the intention, has two parts. These two parts are these relative transformation of adversity into the path of enlightenment, and then an ultimate transformation of adversity into the path of enlightenment. That's it.
That is the any concern so far.
Could you repeat this class because
The
whole lead, whole man he lead the physics of child some.
Mari di anjo one ni di la rochidas. Samjurla ni samjurne ni sambala ni yorlara. Kunzupchi da tundamchi yorla. So there are two aspects to the practice of transforming adversity into the path of enlightenment. There is intention and the actual application.
yes.
And of these two, the first one has two parts. There is a conventional or a relative transformation of adversity into the path of enlightenment, and then an ultimate transformation of adversity into the path of enlightenment. Yes.
Good, thank you.
Okay, ani tambo de garan na konjo dirwa. Tambo ne la ta konjo gi gan la konde shawos na dungin chungwa thamje ta ga zula dungin ji chung de go ra. De dungin chungwa thamje har dan zen la as dharma sheba. Che zang ga zula dungin u de de khari chini go ra la na asra. Ngonjo phar dar jilan zu zu de go me se tinde we da mo ne de khasna dan zen zura su ga dan zen zabashto. tillatene ani danje de ngana drango mashi anto drango mashi tan ani kangi de chungore dumi de chungore estra simjen thangji tenchewa mashebe che simjen thangji rangi phamas chenyure kade chumba chanjare ten niba mashine tilagata ne ngajo windo shashana khulungaji ma ko chegora che di mashebe ge ani mashepa lembe la di jinse tillatene sra lembe tata dunya thangji 단제지 년바 때문에 싫어. 제가 단다 감줄라 동이 칸데 뭐 칸데 주는데 또 투자데 수수가 단제를 알리고 그래스라. 와. 제가 렌렌 타지 찍라 다라디 렌렌라디 지나 간도 이딜라 큰제 로질 코드. 와. 렌렌 타지 찍라 다서나디 아니 제가 티 가르라나 다문이 가르나 단제레. 티 가르치기라나 간도 동이 마부지레 용주도 동이 마부지 티기도 와서 그 sama 단제기 왕기 용거레스라. 근디 다 간도 다 단제기 대샤당 안돌아 동이 뭐도 싫어. 다알디 대샤당도 된들래 고도.
So then when we talk about the intention, developing the intention, we say there are two aspects to it. The first one is the relative transformation of the adversity into the path of enlightenment. And when we talk about the relative transformation of adversity into the path of enlightenment, then first we need to know who is our real enemy. And here the commentary says that all suffering arises from this ignorance of our true enemy, and the true enemy and the true source of all our suffering is this self-grasping and self-cherishing attitude that we have, and we are also mistaken in our conception of other sentient beings, that we do not really look at them as our mothers, that we do not really have an attitude of gratefulness to these sentient beings for the fact that they served as our mothers in our previous lives. And then dungi thamchi thagzingi nyebar tembe ju chirlana kanari
dungi thamchi ani danzegi nyeba temba dungi thamchi danzeji nyeba chesa dungi sama khande omosna danzegi chebala teni chungres nyeba tani dungi moyagi nyeba de susure danzegi sure ra to michile nani nyeba tanglo yo tanda ngato dungi moyagi nyeba de sure chire danzegi chires.
So then the fact that we suffer, the fact that we suffer, and the source of our, the ultimate, the real source of our suffering is this the source of all like our suffering, the real source of all our suffering is this self-grasping or the self-cherishing attitude we have. So herein, when we realize that this is the true enemy that we need to overcome, the self-grasping, then all this aversion towards suffering, all this resentment that we have for the fact that we that we suffer, then kind of combine all that resentment and put it on this true enemy, which is this self-grasping. That's all.
딱 딜레 빼도 샤나 아주 지 나와이나 얘기 칼라도 시기 지치서 사야도 다 아주 직강이 가르치느라 안에 나도 직강이로 셈발가 아 코치에서 말해서 예시서 파파주 주고라 네디 나라서 셈 나로 소소 다데데 딘디서 거라 그래서 야보단 카드다는 미신바지 치디 주로신 아주 저거여라.
So herein, when we think about it in our daily life, whenever we suffer through something, then our natural reaction always is to point towards an outside source of suffering, like the food, some food that I ate, or someone who hurt me. Wherein, if you kind of ultimately, if you are able to kind of scrutinize this with reason, then ultimately, this suffering, it springs from inside ourselves, from this self-grasping. Yes.
Thank you. Page apoji shawainara. Pena the murder ngal tsitsubuchi lawa shashira chik mission baji ngal tsitsubuchi lawa shan yegi tsitsubudi dawara nye patangshana ngal gangi ke kuchse ra ta titsik de ngal kharala ini chik napuch la ra ti nabu de yegi sanodan ngara yi pe ngal heledo ini tsik de la sanodan ngal kharchen la ini yemen yemaya la udu tanda la udu an ko nga jinsu kharchen la ina ra tende ko sanodan sosoje det kor helede ma to chaida ti suzana si korala chita dasam jira den takla patangshana di ke ku sheyo mare ine anzugi ende suda susuge chetta ti gal chikshana kala nga pe ago khope duje duasani mala ende kharchen la ina ya susu de be 기본적 ra anzugi nganzo be sunje chegorda 치즈부질나 라사요 말에 지카리나 지트셴부 트냠바 두자 카르코나 간도 지 만데 와치랴 디 카자나 간조 나라서 베 순저 지워라 식신냠 바치네 안조로 코마지 코소나 마즈와체 디나 심벌도 동이 지기도 계산 디 안조 코와도 나라 바탕샤나 심벌 강이 테마서 라 미니 바샤샤라 사들 미니 지바지샤니 바차 지기 다가는 코 딜라와데 디파이 땅인 콜 강이 게체마 당아로지 니디가 삼당 알아 가르쳐 라이는 가 메페아고요 코랑 알레 두아 단동알레 엔젤로 드라마 삼다는 코고로는 데드코라야 칼로 메르치 바고 콘도 라 셴바디게 나 캐마를 코라다슬레 나네 다잖아 코 가는 게신다 디 카라하 코르스는 나도 다한점 셴바 소소 송저지라 아메페아고요 엔데야고는 단동알레 엔젤로 소소에 지 쳔부로 이제 딜레테는 중고다 라 베라바산 텐데로 운행 안수 중고.
So to give you an example, of the fact that our suffering ultimately comes from this self-grasping, then imagine that she said some harsh words towards me, and then if I'm able to kind of when I hear it, then if I'm able to kind of let it go from this side, when I hear it from here, then I just let it go from this side, then I do not really suffer the consequence of hearing this harsh words. But if she says some harsh words to me and then I keep it inside myself and then think about it, then it becomes more magnified, wherein all the anger arises because you think about yourself in comparison to the harsh word that she used upon you, wherein you think about, oh, I'm not at fault, right? I'm blameless in this situation. I am something. So herein you are grasping at the self. And then with this grasping at the self, then you are cherishing yourself too much now. You want to protect yourself, this self. So this is the reaction we have to a harsh word. And when we kind of think about it, these words, harsh or sweet, they are actually mere sounds. They do not have the natural ability to hurt us, right? But it is ourselves, the self-grasping, when we grasp the self, that propels us to feel anger or to have like a reaction towards that sound. So it is also evident in the fact that even though if you are abused, if you are verbally abused by someone, then no two people have the same reaction to that. Some people are able to let go, but some people just keep thinking about it, and this is evident this kind of illustrates the point that in reality all suffering comes from this self-grasping.
Okay, that is true. Tene she sun de sarta dala su dungi chi chun yang sra so so dungi khade chuwe na rani chi saran la da su zuwe lemba yimbe che ta rani la su dungi kharu ne su su danze ge wangi chungwa re sra pena ta na nawa chawa da kharin ka ngi kar chung ngana chawa hama che se bi res wana ngana ta da chik che ta mandi wa chik che res wana ngam mi chik chu bu la wa na ngara yema pa che ta mandi wa chil ten chungwa res so so ge la di kar khado khake la jo so so la ke wa na tata chawara rani da de zuwe de ge lemba re ma to ane jen la kha me jen la kha ko yo ma res jen re pha re tsir la la tu ko yo ma di so so re es la ra ji de sa na sa chawa kha yo ba chen ji de na lo la ji ge ma ru ba da chawa ra chewe de ne de ji kha yo ba yin na ya sa yo ta sa ji ta ji pa la de ta 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 ha yo ra ji ta ane dung 아니 진이 봐 칸데시 여봐 있나 양스 대거스 디 참마 가르라나 대거 다든 zembal이 중어레스라 디딘데 지딩을 신나이나리 타나이나리 지문디 봐 가르 여봐 있나 근데 소소 알아서 단zel레 되는 중어레스 제자 디 칸데스나 단단 델은 제 첸라도 먼저 동들라는 지 네버치니도 줄 시도고라 다디 델라디 실로라 심제나 마주와 첸네 데첸 테고 호슬라 데체드 스르라나 다 소소 달라 라 da chi shi cha de chen de ko da la chi shi cha la di de na khar che go re ta khar che go re la ju de de ko la di de na la jin se de do de chen la de de dong de la de ju de an de chen de sir na na da dan de ba di re ta di khar che go re do la ra
So then when we established that the real source of suffering springs from this grasping at the self, then when you yourself go through any sort of suffering, then learn to not to blame an outside person or an event for your suffering. Then know that any suffering that you go through ultimately springs from this self-grasping and self-cherishing attitude. And then this is when you try to relate it to yourself. And then in the outside world, in samsara itself, then all harm, all like a fear and all suffering, any suffering, any fear, any harm that exists in this suffering also springs from this self-grasping. And then if we know that this is the true enemy, this enemy of self-grasping, which is the root of all suffering, then what do we do with this self-grasping attitude? Yes. So we have 10-15 minutes left. So rather than going with the text, I will encourage questions at this point. If there are no questions, then we will continue with the text. Yes.
So, in the same context, what we are discussing, when someone says some words to you which are not very good, it's a form of mental suffering which you can alleviate by assuming that it never happened or it's not happening to you. But what about physical harm? If someone does a physical harm, then how do you apply this concept?
Tadanda tsizubla Geshema Dawa Yirangla ani dungye roji yongma do semnang dungye roji yongma do ngusumgi dungye luida choagi dungye dio mara ani de ina tsizub shena da yametang chungmasong shemasong samsang ro chenai di donen chetogi ros ta miji gi ngusumdo ani soso luila ani chewatang ne bache de chena ani khandis nyamne cheguris. Okay, then I would like to hear how will you try to overcome this challenge? That if someone physically harms you, then how would you react and how would you try to overcome this?
I would want to avoid that person. So that is building on my other doubt which was coming earlier. When we talked about anger, ignorance and attachment. So not being angry is one part. But if you know that there is a particular object or a particular person who is going to harm you, or let me step back, let me elaborate further. let's say a train is coming, it's an object. If I keep walking in its way, it's going to hurt me. So a wise thing for me to do is to step away, allow the train to pass. Similarly, if I see someone angry, if I find a negative energy or a negative person in my life, who I know will keep harming me again and again, or keep giving me reasons to become angry, then rather than taking the approach of taking his suffering, I would prefer to take the same approach, because that object is like a train to me. No matter what I do, the train will keep coming in its path. So I will avoid. So my response would be to avoid that person.
Kurangi chena ni midi yoe tapshi chesaris. Kajana na midi la mayo na ngarang lung lang dam inda cheshur giras. Ta kogi peji shayda. Kisi religi ligi nas. Religi lamga dila churang lang dina. Religi churang neme yemba insha sharas. Ni cheza mi lung sao ani yana mi dindero susula sewa chingi jilena yoe di kechishiris. Ani takshin nyamje la yaro da dinde nyamne chewa le yaro mi di yoe na yaga yoris.
tanda kāngi chīya tere, chēdā ngā sō sōjī tāme bāji īmā īnzā rā, tende chī chī kīndo shī shirā, tē mūchē sā tere yō gu shirā, rā, ngō nē kī shāngchū sāmbā dā nē, tā tūni jī na, tāndō pā dō nyam nē chē wā rā. Ngā sō tanda chē nyam bā dā ngā sō shirā khārī chā bā dā dā tēne yō dā mā chē chē kē shē mā rā, kōrā tē pē āgō sā mā tā chik kī dā. Tā chik dā tā kī khārī sā wā ngā sō chik tsī tsū pū rā wā ngā sō tē sēmbā lā mā shā tā shā nā dī kī dō wā sā. Tā lū dā ngā chū na āni khā chā ngō sō ngā sō nā wā rā. Tā yā na kērā nā mī chī kī chū rā kī dzī rō tū yā na rā. Digal di nasat the yorba then nasat chur kanda ale khamar ngadi jiguchi putu da labada matu da ozeres ko nga mase da ozeres ra tende da san chungi dungi di machung tayando nesutu.
So of course as ordinary beings the way you describe how you would face a situation is a very practical way of dealing with this situations, and as we said when we talk about these practices, then in here we aspire to the level of a bodhisattva, a bodhicitta, wherein we aspire to that. But as ordinary beings, we do not really have that kind of compassion in us to actually, physically take upon such a harm if we are in danger. I think so. As ordinary beings, the best way is, since we ourselves are under the hold of these negative emotions, then it is very liable that we will react in an unwanted manner. So the best advice for us as practitioners, as ordinary beings, is, as you mentioned, to adopt a practice of avoiding this. But now, when we talk about the instance wherein you compared this train and then this someone who wants to inflict physical harm upon you, now I want you to think about it in this manner. Now let's say he inflicted harm on you, right? Now herein we can practice the text, the instructions of the text, right? When you use someone uses harsh words, it's just a mental disturbance that we feel, right? And there is no actual physical sensation of harm that we feel. But let's say someone actually cut your finger, the thumb, then you feel that physical sensation of harm, and then you feel real harm in that moment. And now, at that moment, if you are able to kind of adopt this attitude that at least I have my whole hand to kind of have a wider perspective of the situation rather than just thinking about the fact that you lost a piece of your finger, then it has this effect of mitigating the mental suffering that you go through from physical harm. So this is the kind of practice we can try to relate in our daily lives.
Forgiveness.
Yes.
Self-defense is not forgiveness.
소소 송접 지혜지어라. 가족이 술을 치료지 자가요나. 소소 송접 지혜라 팔에 슈그래라 해지다 대산 잡니나 요라. 소소 송접 지도 팔에 슈나 팀다에 튄데요라. 어디라게 어디다 미롱와르스.
지난데디 오늘 주의 돌으시는데 늦으라. 늦지 지워라. 다이네야 미카시베 삼담힘 지가 그 가서 두두 치린지도. 그런 잠잠 다 내단을 되게 지고해라. 지당하서 되는 지술라는 디 미겨와 차워라. 그래서 지고라 쓰다나 파슈라 되는 디 랍자드 마라 치 랍자드 마래. 최근에 도단전에 디 차고 마라. 직접 보면서 소베제 이내 저거 왜 초치가 차고래. 다이는 지대 나로라. 가서 직카디네 파 제 말로는 잠들 갈 커버스다. 소소소소 내당 되게 쟤네 야가도 맞네 니가 소소 남주지라. 그 sometimes.
So then when we talk about self-defense, if it purely out of self-defense and then it is not motivated by a sense of revenge, then I can't...
But there could be the sense of revenge attached to it.
Yes, exactly. So then... So, so yes, so from a pure dharmic standpoint of the view, then the motivation is the intention is the most important thing, right? So if this is motivated by a sense of like revenge or anger, then of course self-defense is not a real pure, from a dharmic sense of the word, then it is kind of tainted by a negative poison already, right? But now in a worldly ways, the way the world works is very different. So herein, I cannot really say like whether it is permissible to act in self-defense or not. It just depends on the situation and the kind of danger that person poses to you. So you have to react in a like manner. Yes.
계산 얘기라는 저 메시지 시트로 저는 저 파스고는 디 선이 등으로 차오라 이내야 내다가 따이데 수수기 직 사제 때문에서 내가 미로바트야 있는데 아니 수수기 직 저저치라 간데 따지진도 이렇게 좀 봐요 아무리 제니 뭐 다시 다는 수수는 게라 라 셴바 딩은 저처럼 세고 또 그러라네 디 호레요 뭐라
So then as with the world that with the way that the world actually works, then self-defense is a practical way of reacting to such a situation. But herein, when you do that, then of course, if it's like affected by like anger or some sort of resentment, then it's already tainted by a negative emotion. But now with the way that the world works, I think so since this act of self-defense, it comes from a sense of like protecting the self, then it's kind of a self-grasping already, right? And from a pure dharmic point, this is self-grasping. But as human beings who need to sustain their life, and with the way that the world works, then we need to focus on not like coming into such a situation in the first place. That is a practical way of approaching this situation. Wherein, like, if you look at to kind of think ahead, like before you go to some new place, then if that place is kind of dangerous, then to not go alone. Like, try to look for practical solutions and practical preventive measures before like such a situation presents itself to you. Yes.
So I have a question. Yesterday you mentioned that, like in Buddhism, let's say if killing one person can save 10 people's life, then that's fine. So let's say in this case, I know that this person is going around and cutting many fingers, and not everyone is going to feel that it's fine, at least he did not cut my hand. So let's say out of self-defense, out of intent to help others, sentient beings, I cut his hands.
Yes,
Not
but
out of revenge.
when we talk about that example,
is that dharma or is it negative?
now like it depends on the intention of your intention. Now, okay, the koi dilagir kasang anzo di jirabiji anzo pedo shara. Temba ni chuchu zinjila mingabja ni sela sela de ni chisera ni tse mingat ngabja sochap turis. Ta dedo opeshana ni mijigli kisi mi mango ki zugu tupa dugyo enasta. I think you are trying to refer to Angulimala. Angulimala, the story of Angulimala. No? Okay. 거기 누구 망보지기 똑바로나 미디라 파세션나 아니 디 최차기열의 최차기열 말이래. Whether it constitutes dharma or not, this is your question.
Like what is the right thing?
아니 딜라 제롱와 디카르레 침미롱 디카르레스.
네, 다코 내 샤워 있나라. 미참막세 샤야 돼. 미참은즈가 또 샤나. 그 이빌세다 거요 맞지. 무슨 주 스심니 콜 랍자제 근데 지죠만 랍저로 자라. 아니 진이 바로 순순 따여로. 근데 진라. 근데 진짜 타마코 타마제야 미나 생지미 메세발란다 이마 타이네 우투니 랑가치 모토도 서면은 다 마뉴를 떼오라. 다 가던데 산주선바디 나서 할라나 mambuchi de tiktango na taera mambuchi so do na di ta di ba ma cha go ra na di ya ko te sa te so la de ra.
So it really depends on the situation we're in. Like, I think when you give this example that this guy goes around cutting other people's fingers, then to kill that person, I think, is an extreme reaction. There is a better way to face this situation wherein we try to apprehend him first, right? Hold him. And then, like, if we are out of any other means to try to stop this person from doing that, then of course an extreme measure is justified. But then we also need to always try to look for a wise decision in these moments. What is suitable and applicable to the level of danger that person presents. Now, when we talk about the example of the Buddha's previous life, then he was at his wit's end. Now, this person is somehow going to kill because they are at sea. There was no other way like the Buddha could think of. So this is why he adopted this extreme measure of killing that person to save the lives of 500 people. So it's a balance that he's trying to achieve here. Toko chure mare lagir midi se chenayra. The actual act of killing is not a dharmic activity, of course. Even a bodhisattva, even when he does it with that intention, he has to suffer for the action that he committed. He will suffer the result.
And just one related question before we move on. When you're meditating and taking people's suffering, for a person like this, would you still take his suffering and wish happiness for him?
All the more. Yes. Mi dinde dojile tonglen de gomna yora. Thanu mi dinde dojile tonglen gom gores. Dile to dewe la gom gora mun tonglen.
Today then so zugutu de ga to sa mala ra. De ta di tina nga lo shin da lam lo shin khabura. Ta ti ngara zu level ta sam tang ora. Ngaro ni tu sa mare the ja. Ra ni tu ni mone yora. Ja la pe de par kare chen chi chi de gi san sam bala so ta de yora. Ni ngara zu khai la ile so kare ka. Ta nge ta mutu bare la na ya mare. 단능게 다기 보고 준주질을 샤 배샤서 근데 때문에 보고 준주질을 두고는 아니 수수게 파말라 두고 네 아니 데즈파 토부토모 쳐가지면 된들라 두고 근데 파파파 수수기 제컬라 근데 파 잠니 근데 포토 투여요 로데 자예로 카드 거로 단단하나 소절에 나서 백깔에 컨트레스라 세상 아주 로드 진 단단 아주 로그는 쉬운 말에 가르치는 지역으로서는 직제라 나도 동의 왜 봐라 띵가는 미 동의 가지네요 아주 리트어도 못 벌레고라 이네 수수 로게 장대나 칼리
So herein the text would advise to aspire to this level of bodhicitta. Then at that level you have to be able to practice all the more like compassion for such a person. And then now this would seem like something this would sound something hard to accept for us because we already have too many questions here. Why should I practice compassion for someone like that? I already have sufferings of my own. This is the way we think. So herein, this is why it's called mind training. It's not easily done, right? It's something that we aspire to. And then herein, when we think about it, with this kind of questions, it seems like it's impossible to practice these. But then when I give you the instances, small instances, wherein like this unconditional love and compassion is evident within us. When I gave you the example of this little infant who was throwing a fit because of his suffering and then the reaction of the bunch of adults around him, then we know that in these instances that this unconditional love and compassion, we are capable of generating it in ourselves. So if we are able to generate it in this small, short period and small instance, then we can of course inevitably train our mind to aspire to kind of like broaden the scope of our loving love and compassion. Yes.
고야 저 하마에 단단히 가르쳐보는 생님만을 지어서 산지라 나 된대가는 같이도 이제 담보 수송 고주들이 소소기 찍지 설 해토니다 소소다 니니들 네 고주나 레하도 담보 거는 파기 넘서 트랙하디 자디랑 아주 공원을 빼갈래 가고 봐 근데는 안에 도다로
So herein I would advise you not to like jump extremely to the point of someone you do not like or someone who actually poses you harm. Try to practice this giving and taking to someone who has like helped you, right? So you definitely want to like repay their kindness or like to do that to them. Then to like help them too in a future instance where they need help. So the way like we work is we kind of forget to like reciprocate that kindness. So before like jumping to the extreme of helping or practicing giving and taking on someone who poses you danger, try not to forget to repay the kindness of others that actually helped you. So in this way, try to practice it.